Alright, we're continuing the series, The Unconventional Truth About the Walking, and this is video 4, which is going to be probably the longest one, and we have a lot to cover in it. And the title is rather straightforward: The Smart How-To of Improving the Walking. First of all, let's do the quick review of the previous videos, because we already covered quite a lot of ground and it really makes sense to get a quick recap of what we already have done. This entire video series started with an inspiration, and the inspiration itself came from the case of this boy. His name is Luca. He is the son of Katya, our ABR trainer from Belgium, and in March he has been through a horrifying and awful ordeal. He has been on that tragic bus ride in Switzerland when a group of Belgian school children were on a bus that smashed and crashed into the tunnel. Most of his classmates died. Himself, he has been trapped in a bus, suffered multiple injuries, multiple fractures, and all in all, that was really a horrific experience, a huge tragedy. But out of this tragedy, out of this terrible incident, came the ability to prevail and overcome. Thanks to his own determination, thanks to the incredible work ethics of his mother, and well, thanks to the smartness and efficacy of the tools, strategies and techniques provided by ABR, we were able to make his recovery path really smooth and fast. The first thing that we needed to do was to save the leg, because the leg itself was in a dangerous condition. After the injury itself, after the emergency surgeries, there was the damage to the tissues, multiple layers of them in the area of the knee. Also, because of the scarring and the lack of the circulation, what was happening is the development of the gangrenous state. The leg was actually starting to rot, and that was really an area of the huge concern, with a very poor prognosis, with the expectation of the multiple surgeries, and potentially it could have ended even in the amputation. So thanks to the transfascial viscoelastic stimulation and the very diligent work of his mother, it was possible to really save and transform the leg in incredibly short period of time. Within just a 6-week period, there was a transformation from this dangerous initial situation with the rotting skin to the healthy pinkish one and the full recovery of the integrity of the skin. But once we were through this initial stage of actually saving the leg, the next phase came in. We had to bring him back to walking and to function, which in itself was supposed to be a rather difficult task, because after the multiple injuries, after the immobilization, and after those challenges with the healing of the leg, he was really weak. And the expectations were that the entire recovery following the traditional physical therapy routines would be taking months of hard work and well, a lot of effort and really prolonged therapy sessions. Things turned out very different. Thanks to the ABR unconventional approach and thanks to our techniques, it was possible to really transform the situation in practically no time. These pictures demonstrate the difference between his condition on April 26th and May 7th. So just 12 days apart, we made this major transformation from being completely incapacitated and walking, really heavily leaning on the crutches without being able to put any meaningful weight on his legs. We have the situation where he walks easily with a single hand support and actually makes quite a few steps even without the support, so being really on the way to the smooth recovery. On the one hand, these pictures as such, they already speak volumes, they speak for themselves, but I think it makes sense to really zoom in a little bit more and just walk you through some frames which are demonstrating the difference between the before and after condition, bearing in mind that this is just 12 days in between, and the typical expectation for him would have been months of effortful rehabilitation, and this is the transformation that took place just in a space of 12 days. So there was something which really took place in the unconventional manner. And before we move into the details of this unconventional presentation, let's have a look at the specifics first. So this is the April 26th. You can see no usage of the legs, heavy reliance on support and the crutches, and then the transition to the attempts to make certain steps. Really not much is going for him. The support is needed via the crutches plus the extra insurance provided by his mother. So you can see very clearly he's not using the legs by any means, just effectively shifting them from place to place, following the movement which emerges from the movement of the crutches, and you can see that periodically he actually loses his balance and drops. So that's the challenging reality, and the expectations at that point were quite usual, that he would be subject to prolonged rehabilitation period, probably lasting like at least several months, with a lot of effort, with a lot of work engaged, and at the same time that wasn't really a bright prospect. These frames are taken from the video which is shot just 12 days later. You can see that the single arm support, really minimal, provides all that he needs for the comfortable walking around. And not only that, you can clearly see how well controlled is the upper body, how much freedom is there. And as a result, what we're observing this. We're observing the ability to get even a number of steps without the support. Well, they're not yet super confident, but this is really a huge transformation. And what we are seeing a hug of triumph as opposed to the hug of the desperation that was there just short 12 days before. This is the quite amazing and remarkable transformation, and what we want to get through, we want to understand impressive results which are obvious, what's behind them, how did we get there. But before that, we really have to understand that the unconventional results required unconventional path. Instead of months and hard effort, it took just several days. Well, to do the justice to this case, we really have to zoom in, and of course we're also keeping in mind our big picture, because all this story, all this narrative leads us to the fundamental and large questions. How can we help children with the cerebral palsy? What kind of lessons could the parents of the kids with cerebral palsy take out of this remarkable development? Let's get back to the fundamentals and remind this key statement that your number one priority is the awareness, and that you really have to start with the why, where the why precedes the how, and you have to be able to make deliberate and intelligent choices. And to make those intelligent choices, I gave you in the video 2 a list of questions that you really have to be able to connect to, whether it's you as a parent or whether it's a professional who tries to mentor and tries to lead you into some program. That this is a whole list of questions that really have to be answered specifically before jumping into action. So this is just a quick review of them. 1, to bear the weight or not to bear the weight. 2, to focus on the upper body or to focus on the legs directly. 3, to target the muscles or the deeper fascia. 4, to be axial or to be pivotal. 5, to be longitudinal or to be radial. 6, to focus on the long kinetic chains or to go for the short ones, right? And these questions to begin with, and we are not finished yet, so they might sound as of being sort of strangely worded on being too specific, but really this is something that you as a parent have to understand. This is the part of literacy and education that you need in order to be effective, like pro-parent, in order to be able to really help your child rather than just doing some mindless action. Because mindless action leads to negative results, not even to lack of success, but to negative outcomes. So the point number 7 here is to focus on the closed chains or the open ones. 8, to force the fake straightness or to respect the intrinsic connectivity. 9, just do it mentality, just do it effort, or going for the precision, whether we're working for the preliminary setup and mindset or just throw ourselves into seemingly intuitive action. And 10 is no pain, no gain versus the accumulated micro impact. And of course, all this sums up under this large umbrella. What are we going to do? Are we going to do functional, like I put it in inverted comma, right? Because this is really not the correct expression. It's just the label people tend to use, misleading themselves. So are we going for the direct functional training, or are we going to look for the precise build of the key connections? So these are the key lines of reasoning that we've brought from the previous videos, and then we really went to the next step. And the next step was about asking the right questions, and the right questions about making deliberate, intelligent choices, where we understood that with ABR we really have a specific focus, really unique specific focus. It might sound long and quite elaborate, that we really look for the axial loading of deep radial fascial structures in the context of the long closed kinetic chains, with the emphasis on following the intrinsic pathways of preferred stress transfer. So in this video we are going to uncover some of the elements behind this statement and behind this intent, behind this way of formulating what actually we are supposed to be doing in order to deliver the maximum efficacy. This segues us into the next step, which was the video 3, which brought the most paradoxical statement, the essence of the why. Actually, it's very straightforward. First, it sounded really paradoxical, but as we dig in, it sounds less and less so. The legs are the weakest link. Contrary to what you would think intuitively, legs do not support the upper body, but they buckle and fold. And that's where I brought this notion of the artillery wheel, or the spoke, the hard spoked wheel versus the bicycle wheel, which is the description of the tensional pre-stress support, which is exactly what the modern fascia science tells us about the nature of the fascia network. And so far, unfortunately, this theoretical knowledge hasn't made much of its way into the practice. And this is what we are busy with. This is what we really want to educate you about, is how this new knowledge should be converted into the practice. But first of all, it's really important to understand how this thing works. That if we get back to this idea that this is the contact with the ground, that the contact with the ground introduces the slack into the tensional system. It doesn't support, it actually introduces the slack. So the critical element, the integrity and the ability to sustain the entire position, depends on how good is the integrity of the rest of the entire tensional wheel, particularly on the top. So that's the key idea. And this is, I believe, a great illustration that shows it very clearly when the powerful impact comes at the bicycle wheel as our tensional analogy, or as our tensional model for the tensional structure of the fascial system. We see what happens. Actually, the weakest part is the one at the level of the impact. So you can really clearly visualize when you step on the ground, that's exactly what happens. So it's really important to maintain the integrity of the entire rim, of the entire tensional construct, in order to be able to deal with the slack introduced from the ground. And then we went over the cerebral palsy example, where the clear demonstration that the legs exhibit their true buckling nature. We used this example of this really cute little girl who was showing us two modalities, either the withdrawal of the legs or complete buckling of those upon the contact with the ground. But we didn't finish with that. We actually went further and we put the next essential component into this chain of evidence, because with the healthy child, the one who has the true walking, there is the same story. The legs, they still buckle, and it's the upper body that makes them useful. This is the example taken from the photo session of this super cute girl, the granddaughter of Vince Goffreda, our veteran, now retired trainer from ABR Canada. So, and you can see clearly what happens, that as she lands on the ground, the legs buckle first, and then she uses the integrity and the strength of the upper body to lift herself up. So everything comes up together. So that's what we really covered in those first videos. Well, if you are still not convinced about this bicycle wheel-like tensional integrity within the fascial system that defines the way that we deal with the ground and the way that we actually walk, well, I'm going to bring you an extra pile of evidence. Let's have a closer look at the way that the layouts of the critical areas that absorb the ground impact in walking is done. This is the healthy fascial, tensional, rim and spokes connections of the legs. Let's have a look. So this is a picture of Charlotte again, taken a few years later, actually it's this year, and what we are seeing here, that's what I call a pelvic monopod. Right? The idea of the monopod comes from the singularity of the connection which unifies two legs and the pelvis together. That's the monopod. And what you're seeing here, how does it look like? It looks exactly like the bicycle wheel, the rim and the spokes inserted into it. So that's quite amazing, but that's not all. As we look further down, we will see that the way that the single monoleg, now the monoleg is a definition which applies to this unit which is counted from the iliac and the sacroiliac junction, where we talk about the unified single leg as it originally develops as this pod that comes in the embryonic development as the unileg. What we are seeing there, the same story. When we look at that, we can see very clearly that the structure is exactly the same. There is exactly the same presence of the rim. Well, we'll look further. Now it's the true leg, it's the ischial and gluteal connection there. What are we seeing? We're seeing the same story. We're seeing the same exact principle, the rim and the insertion. But that's not all. We look further. Now we look at the knee level of the mid leg and the rim and spokes. We see the same thing. This is the profile of the healthy knee joint. This is the connection of the lower thigh and the knee. And you can clearly imagine here how the impact comes from the ground through the leg and how important it's to have this integrity of the upper knee in order to be able to withstand this impact. The ankle is done the same way, but it's just not so clear in terms of visualization because the tissues there are more dense, so really drawing this image showing those rims is not so convenient. But I hope that you can take this by induction, that you've seen it as the sequence of transitions. You see it as the monopod at the very top, you see it as the unileg or the monoleg when it comes as the first division within the pelvis, you see it at the ischial and the gluteal connection of the true leg, and you see it further within the leg at the mid level. So these are the clear indications of how the things work. and you can see that upon the load transfer, this is how this soft tissue tensional divisions within fascia, that's how they have to work. This is really very obvious and clear, and those arrows, they've indicated it first, but maybe they might be slightly irritating, so I'm showing this without the arrows so that you will be able to see this linkage. So you have to understand that that's how the impact comes from the ground, and if those rims are not strong enough all the way through, the leg is going to buckle and fold. The leg is not going to hold. So that's the key message, that's the key working image that you really have to take on board for yourself. And to get some further visualization for yourself, because these are the standing positions, and with your kids we don't really bring them in those positions, it's not easy, there's too much struggle. Let's have a look at the zoomed in observations similar to what we do with our typical ABR testing. Over here we're going to look more specifically at some of just key tests which are really indicating and demonstrating in the unmistakable and unequivocal fashion how the entire layout and the arrangement of the fascial tissues really follows this principle of the tensegrity wheel. This is the iliac level. This is the level of the monoleg, right? And again, I hope that you really get this idea much clearer now. When we talk about the monoleg, this is the leg which goes all the way from the iliac and, well, down to the foot. And obviously there are two monolegs, the left and the right, both of them following the same principle. Whilst the monopod, that's the layout of the entire singular pelvis which absorbs and engulfs the individual monolegs within. But then, of course, the next level would be the subdivision of each leg within it into the specifically pelvic iliac part, and then the actual true leg as it counts from the gluteal and ischial level further down. So that's just a big layout picture, and then of course further down there's going to be the level of the knee, which goes according to the same fashion, and so on and so forth. So it goes. So this is the construct, this is how the legs are actually laid out. And that's why this layout, I believe, shows explicitly clear how the entire thing works and what's the sequence of kind of this nested wrapping, nested arrangement of the fascial structures one over another. But let's bring in a bit more of the illustrations to give you the true visual. And here this is a concept which I call the double stitching. The double stitching actually indicates the perfect match between the fascial layout and the deeper periosteal structures. Well, in other words, deeper bone layout. That's where you have to have a perfect match. And you can see with the healthy person, there is no way on earth you can possibly move this layer anywhere. And specifically, another important observation here is very clear, that it comes as the double stitch. So therefore what you have is the very clear distinction between the posterior pelvis, then the top of the pelvis, and then the posterior back. So it goes like this. So therefore, if we're looking like sagittally, like we're looking from the side, so therefore the impact that comes from the ground is landing against this platform, against the double stitch, and then it's being returned downwards. So that's how the upper body controls the impact that goes from the bottom. If this division is absent, then we're seeing all sorts of trouble. Then the buckling of the leg passes onto the body, and then we have all sorts of challenges. So this is this layout, and you can see it very clearly on the left side, and then, well, similar story very clearly on the right side. So that's really, when you see me doing those things, during the testing of cerebral palsy kids, this is what I'm looking for. This is the reference that we're actually taking to understand how much is missing in those scenarios. But this is just one look at the situation. Let's have a look at some other dimensions. And what we're seeing, if we take two of them, they bring this very characteristic, very specific gull wing structure, and that's a combination of those two mono legs really wrapped in a single monopod, which is the total pelvic package. So I hope that really rings the bell. I hope it really visualizes how the things are made, and you can see that no matter in which position you do this with a healthy child, whether you're doing it in prone position, whether you do it on the side, whether you do it in standing position, and you've seen it, this connection, this fascial rim and spokes at the very top holds extremely well, extremely steady, where of course the standing position would be the most demanding of them all, because that's obviously the maximum necessity to deal with the legs and the maximum necessity to withstand the impact that comes from the ground. But you can see it looks exactly in the same fashion as it looked when we were dealing with this particular aspect when she was lying down. And if we look further into standing, what we can see, this is just another clearer image of the true leg. And again, it's important to realize that the true leg, the true fascial leg, has very little to do. It's not limited by far. It's not limited to the hip joint, as you can see it on the X-rays, right? Where you've got the pelvis, where you've got all this emphasis on the acetabulum and the insertion of the bones into it, as the orthopedic reasoning, as the compressional reasoning leads you to believe. The important thing is to understand that this is the total division, this is the total package which is integrated here, and you can see the same story. With the healthy child, there is a clear distinction. The back of the leg, the bottom of the pelvis, and then it's the back of the pelvis again, so that when the impact comes, there is a clear rim that holds everything that arrives from the bottom. And again, if you're going to look at your kids, you're not going to see this, you're not going to see the deep attachments, you're not going to see this double stitching and all these key aspects. So this is to visualize how the thing works. And this is absolutely critical. If those distinctions are absent, then there is no way that the impact from the ground would be controlled. So this is a very straightforward message straight away from the beginning, really bringing you the images of how the things are organized so that you will connect your mind to them and really draw the line towards your kids. But overall, the primary goal of this illustration at this point is to show you this obvious thing, that once you allow yourself to be counterintuitive, once you allow yourself to look at the reality in the unbiased way, once you get yourself out of this man-made structures like stack of blocks mentality and the thinking in terms of bones stacked one on top of another, and once you really start translating the tensional reasoning, the understanding of the fascia connectivity into the practical terms of how the whole thing works in action, you can really see that the bicycle wheel model provides by far more accurate representation of what the reality is. So, empowered by these visuals, I hope that now you can really realize those three levels of the fundamental arrangement of the strength within the rim and the upper spokes as it holds the impact, as it withstands the slack introduced from the bottom. And this is this combination of factors. To begin with, just as more simplified picture for you to keep in mind, to have the image of this pelvic monopod rim and spokes. After that pelvic monopod, you're looking for the iliac level of the Riemann spokes as a singular leg in itself, and then you're looking for the next division, the ischial level. So 3 levels altogether. And when we are going to review the initial situation as it was in our case in question, actually this is what you have to keep in mind. You have to keep in mind all these aspects. So fundamentally, the visual that I would like you to keep as kind of schematics here is to understand this, that due to their injuries to the deeper level, to the periosteal level, due to the misuse, due to this weakening and so on, what we experience the weakening at the level of the top spokes. Within those 3 elements that I've just covered, there were certain components of weaknesses. So that's the key element for you to reason, to go beyond the obvious, because, well, of course, the legs, they've lost muscle strength, but on the other hand, the whole connection here is to see how we were able to bring this from this really challenging situation within a space of 12 days when there's definitely not enough to build any muscle strength. So that's the key understanding of the entire case in question. So the first thing, and that's what you've seen in the video as I was describing it to Katya in the previous videos which were live. First thing, we've seen the weaknesses and already developing imbalances at the pelvic monopod level, pelvic lumbar connection. So that's the illustration and the image that you want to keep in mind. Then we have seen the weakening of the distal proximal periosteal tube. Distal proximal, distal is the heel, proximal is the pelvis itself, right? So that's where we really have to remember that to begin with, the entire ossification of the leg at the embryonic stages begins when the pulsations of the umbilical cord deliver their mechanical impact onto the feet, and then the impact goes to the periosteal tube throughout the entire monoleg. So that's this second image that you keep in mind. That's another weakening that we've experienced there. And the third part was the component of the weakening right there at the level of the actual ischial connection itself, where you have seen that he was continuously exposed to this wobbling. So this is the set of challenges, the set of combinations, this sort of triple package of weaknesses that Luka had yet at the stage of April 26th. And to give you a better visual on this, we'll start with that episode where I'm trying to depict the periosteal tube. Then if we look at the details, you can see what happens. These are the types of the reactions that he gives when standing. He gets tired at all of those 3 components and the legs buckle. So he uses the upper body trying to regain them, but that doesn't last long. And then after some really short loading period, you can see that he tries to find the position and the leg shakes and buckles. And that happens multiple times, multiple occasions. So you've seen that the entire sequence there lasted just for like 3 minutes altogether, and eventually his legs completely gave up. But why did they give up? It's not the legs they gave up because they were not really able to do much to begin with. It's those connections at the monopod, at the monoleg, and at the true leg, which eventually gave up. And that's why we really needed to help him in getting the transfer onto the sitting position, because then he was leaning so heavily on the crutches without having any bicycle wheel tensional support, so that he really has been hurting at that level of the very top. So I hope after reviewing all that you're getting a much better picture of how everything works and what are the challenges that I actually experienced that are leading to this poor performance. So there are multiple weaknesses within those tensional fascial Riemann spokes. we see them in three levels: at the level of the pelvic monopod, namely the lumbar pelvic connection; at the level of the monoleg, namely at the distal proximal periosteal tube, which goes all the way up to the iliac level; and at the level of the true leg, so that's the intrapelvic and the ischial gluteal connection. And that's why the expected rehab period, bearing in mind the muscular weaknesses on top of this, right, which I didn't even mention because that's not what we dealt with. But under the normal scenario of the people who focus on the muscular weaknesses, the expectations were several months of rehab and lots of hard work. But we already know that things didn't go this way, that somehow we managed to get these challenges out of the way in the unconventional way, and that's what we're going to cover in the part 2 of this video 4. Because, well, it took me quite a while to walk you through all the preliminary fundamentals, really packing up and putting together the essentials that we built through the previous 3 videos, and adding the visualization of those transitions from the theoretical concept of the bicycle wheel towards the true visualization of those and the live human being and the live healthy child.